My father-in-law boldly declared, "I will be attending every doctor's appointment to personally approve medical decisions." When I protested, he nonchalantly unveiled a power of attorney form already endorsed by my spouse. Enraged, I made a call. The next time he arrived at the doctor's office, a stern security team met him at the door. My father-in-law Harold has always been overbearing, not just your typical controlling parent, but a man who insists on running every aspect of our lives. He treats his opinions like law, and if you disagree, that's just too bad. My husband Michael grew up under Harold's thumb, and even as an adult, Harold found ways to insert himself into our decisions. He would push Michael to make choices his way, making him feel like he couldn't function without his father's guidance. It took years for Michael to start standing up for himself, and just when I thought we were finally moving forward, Harold pulled his worst stunt yet. A few months ago, Michael wasn't feeling well. He was always tired, low on energy, and just seemed off. At first, he brushed it off, but after some worrisome test results, his doctor scheduled more appointments. Naturally, the uncertainty and waiting were stressful, and Michael leaned on me for support. What wasn't normal was Harold suddenly deciding he needed to be involved. Initially, it was just irritating. He would call nonstop for updates, instruct Michael on which tests to get, and even warn him against trusting certain doctors. He even tried to convince us that some alternative remedies would be better than real medicine. Then one day, Harold showed up at one of Michael's appointments. I walked into the waiting room expecting a quiet moment before our consultation, only to find Harold sitting there as if he belonged. "I'm here to ensure things are done correctly," he declared. I was caught off guard and told him, "Michael and I have this under control." But Harold just shook his head, as if I were clueless. "No, dear, I'm overseeing his medical decisions. You don't have the authority." I was furious, but didn't want to cause a scene. I pulled Michael aside and asked if he had invited his father. Michael looked embarrassed and said, "No, he just showed up." I didn't expect him to do this. That should have been the end of it. Michael needed to tell his father to back off, but Harold wouldn't leave. He followed us inside. When the nurse asked about Michael's symptoms, Harold answered for him. And when the doctor inquired about his medical history, Harold jumped in before Michael could even speak. I kept looking at Michael, waiting for him to tell his father to stop. Instead, he sat there silently, letting Harold control the conversation like he always had. That's when I realized that Harold wasn't just trying to help, he truly believed he had the right to decide. I wasn't about to let that happen. After the appointment, I confronted Harold. "You don't get to make Michael's medical decisions," I said firmly. "You're not his guardian, he's a grown man. Back off." Harold just smiled, that smug, condescending smile that made my blood boil. "Oh, but I do," he said, pulling out a document and holding it up like it was a winning lottery ticket, a power of attorney form with Michael's signature on it. My stomach dropped. "This gives me the right to oversee all medical decisions," Harold declared. "I'll be at every appointment from now on. Every decision goes through me." I couldn't breathe. This had to be a fake. I snatched the paper from his hands, my hands trembling as I read it. Michael's name, his signature, it looked real. I turned to Michael and asked, "Did you sign this?" Michael took the paper, scanned it, and his face went pale. "I never signed this," he said. Harold's smug expression faltered for just a second. "This is your signature," he insisted, as if that proved everything. Michael shook his head. "I don't remember signing anything like this. I would never give you that kind of control." Harold shrugged dismissively. "Well, it's done now." I could feel my anger boiling. I wasn't about to let this slide. I took the document home and examined every detail. The more I looked, the more suspicious it seemed. Michael's signature was slightly off. He usually writes fluidly, but this looked copied and stiff. I snapped a picture and sent it to my lawyer, then called the hospital's legal department. I explained everything, sent them the document, and asked what our options were. They took the matter very seriously. If Harold had forged a power of attorney, he could be in big trouble. Their response was firm. "We'll take care of it." I wasn't sure what that meant at first, but soon enough, when Harold showed up at another appointment, he wasn't allowed in. I watched from the waiting room as he walked in, acting as if he owned the place. Before he could reach the reception desk, 2 security guards stepped in front of him. "Sir, you're not authorized to be here," one said. "You do not have legal authority over the patient's medical decisions," the other added. Harold's smile vanished. "Excuse me, I have power of attorney," he snapped. The guard pulled out a folder and flipped through some papers. "Not anymore," he said firmly. Harold's face went pale. I stood up with my arms crossed, watching as the reality set in. I didn't need to say a word. For the first time, Michael stepped up beside me. He looked his father in the eye and said, "Leave, Dad." Harold turned to him, rage burning in his eyes. "You're making a mistake, Michael." But Michael didn't flinch. "No, you did." Harold opened his mouth to argue, but the security guards moved closer. Clenching his jaw and curling his fists, Harold finally turned and walked out. For a while, it seemed like we had won. Harold stopped showing up uninvited, and he wasn't calling or texting nonstop. It felt like our battle was over, until the bills started coming. One afternoon, I opened a bill from a specialist Michael had never even seen before. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but then I noticed the referring party was Harold. I checked the date. It was for an appointment scheduled after he'd been banned from the doctor's office. I called Michael. "Did you book an appointment with this doctor?" Michael frowned. "No, why?" I sent him a picture of the bill. His face fell. "That's not even my handwriting," he muttered. After checking our insurance records, we discovered multiple appointments had been booked under Michael's name without his knowledge. Harold was still trying to control Michael's medical decisions from a distance. I grabbed my keys, determined not to let this slide. I marched into the specialist's office with a printout of the fake referrals and stormed up to the receptionist. My husband never booked this appointment, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to know who authorized this. She glanced at the paperwork, then back at me, clearly confused. It was referred by Harold. Of course it was. He's not authorized to make medical decisions, I replied. This is fraud. Her eyes widened. I didn't know. I pulled out my phone and showed her the email from our lawyer. He lost power of attorney weeks ago. Legally, he has no right to do this. She nodded quickly. I'll talk to the doctor. Please wait a moment. She disappeared into the back. When she returned, she looked uncomfortable. The appointment's canceled, she said. And I'll make sure nothing is scheduled under his name again. But your father-in-law called this morning. He said he'd be attending the appointment with Michael. My hands clenched into fists. Harold was still trying to control Michael's care. If he calls again, tell him I know what he's doing, and I'm not letting it happen, I said. She nodded, but something told me Harold wasn't done. Weeks later, we got a letter from our insurance company. It said, due to recent updates, your emergency contact and secondary decision maker have been changed. I froze. Michael read over my shoulder. What the hell does that mean? I turned the page. Harold's name was listed as the secondary decision maker. I felt my blood boil. Michael immediately called the insurance company. I never approved this, he told them. Who made these changes? The representative hesitated. We received a request from your father. Michael and I exchanged a look. How? I demanded. He has no legal authority. The rep explained, it was processed before the power of attorney was revoked, but I can change it back. Do it, Michael said without hesitation. We spent the next hour going through every document, making sure Harold's name was removed from everything. By the time we finished, I was livid. Harold had somehow slipped past us again, and now I knew he wasn't going to stop. He'd lost control and was desperate to regain it. Michael and I agreed, no more playing defense. We called a lawyer, made sure all legal safeguards were in place, and even changed the locks. At this point, I wouldn't put anything past Harold. Then one night, he showed up at our house. It was late, too late for a casual visit. Michael and I were watching TV when the doorbell rang. Michael frowned. Are we expecting anyone? No, I replied, checking the doorbell camera. There he was, Harold, standing on our porch, hands in his pockets, waiting. I didn't open the door. What do you want? I asked. He smiled at the camera. We need to talk, he said. Let me in. No, I responded firmly. His smile didn't fade. I'll wait. And he did for 2 hours. He just stood there, in the dark, waiting. Michael was getting anxious. Should we call the police? Not yet, I said. We watched him through the camera. He wasn't leaving. He just stood there, staring at the door. At some point, he pulled out his phone and started dialing. Michael's phone rang. He ignored it. Then mine rang, then the house phone. He just kept calling over and over. Finally, he gave up and walked away. But I knew this wasn't over. Harold wasn't just angry, he was obsessed. A few days later, there was a knock at the door. 2 police officers stood outside. Ma'am, we received a welfare check request for Michael. Is he home? My stomach dropped. Michael stepped into view. I'm right here. The officer nodded. Your father called us. He said he hasn't been able to reach you and is concerned for your safety. I laughed loudly. Michael looked furious. We're fine, I said. He's lying. The officers exchanged a look. Mind if we come in just to confirm? We both knew refusing would make things worse, so we let them in. They looked around. No signs of distress, no reason for concern. One of them sighed. Sorry about this, false reports happen. We knew exactly what this was. Harold was trying to weaponize the police against us. And the worst part? It worked. Now, he knew he could send people to our door whenever he wanted. Michael ran a hand through his hair. This isn't going to stop, is it? He asked. I exhaled slowly. No, I said, but we're going to end it. Harold had already crossed so many lines. Every time we thought we had blocked him out, he found a new way to push back in. He wasn't just trying to control Michael's medical care anymore. He was trying to control our entire lives, and I had a feeling things were about to get worse. One night, we were fast asleep when we woke up to pounding on the front door. It was 1:30 a.m. Michael shot up, groggy and confused. What the hell? I checked the doorbell camera. 3 police officers, flashing lights. My stomach twisted. I answered the intercom. Can I help you? Ma'am, we received a 911 call from this address. The caller reported an ongoing domestic disturbance. My blood ran cold. There is no emergency here, I said firmly. We didn't call 911. The officer's face stayed neutral, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Ma'am, we need to confirm that everyone inside is safe. Michael and I exchanged looks. We let them in. One officer spoke to me in the kitchen while the other took Michael aside. Do you feel safe in your home? He asked. I clenched my jaw. Yes. There was number 911 call? This was a false report, I said. The officer nodded slowly. Do you have any idea who might have made the call? I didn't hesitate. Harold. His eyes flickered with recognition. After a few more questions, the officers confirmed there was no emergency and left. But the message was clear. Harold had weaponized 911 against us. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was dangerous. Michael worked for a private law firm, and up until now, Harold had mostly left his job alone. That changed 3 days after the fake 911 call. Michael walked into his office that morning and immediately knew something was off. People were staring. His boss looked tense. Then the HR manager called him in. Michael sat down, confused. "What's going on?" he asked. She folded her hands on the desk. "We received an anonymous email claiming you've been using illegal substances at work." Michael froze. She slid a printed copy of the email across the desk. It was filled with lies, accusing Michael of showing up intoxicated, claiming he had pills in his office, even suggesting his erratic behavior was due to a mental health breakdown. Michael's hands shook with rage. This is a lie. His boss believed him, but HR had no choice. They had to conduct an internal review. Michael came home that night furious. "I know who did this. I already knew. Harold had tried to ruin Michael's career." I grabbed my phone. "We need to end this right now." The next morning, we went straight to our lawyer. "We need a restraining order," I said. The lawyer nodded. "Given the police reports, the fraudulent medical claims, and now this workplace attack, you have a strong case." We filed immediately. It would take a few days to process, but just knowing we were taking legal action gave me some relief. But then Harold struck again. 2 days later, we got a letter from Harold's lawyer. Michael opened it, read 3 lines, and turned pale. "What is it?" I asked, my stomach twisting. He handed me the letter. Harold was suing us for elder abuse. I had to read it twice to believe my eyes. He was saying we had been financially exploiting him, ignoring him, and even emotionally abusing him by cutting him off completely. He had witnesses lined up, his new wife, barely mentioned before, and some distant relatives we hadn't seen in years. Michael ran a hand through his hair, looking miserable. He was trying to twist the story. I sank hard onto the couch. He wanted to force us into a defensive position so that if this went to court, he could drag it out for months. Michael buried his face in his hands. He knew this would make us look like the villains. I wasn't going to let that happen. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. By the time we entered the courtroom, I had every piece of evidence in order. The forged power of attorney with highlighted sections, the fabricated medical appointments, the documented insurance fraud with timestamps, and the police reports all ready for submission. Harold sat across from us with a smug look, convinced he was about to win. Then our lawyer stood up and dismantled his entire case. "You claim you were being financially exploited," our lawyer began. "So can you explain why you're the one committing insurance fraud?" Harold's face twitched. "You claim you were emotionally abused," our lawyer continued, "yet you called the police under false pretenses, tried to sabotage your son's job, and even committed medical fraud?" Harold's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We then presented the police body cam footage from the fake 911 call. The judge watched in silence as Harold's jaw clenched. Finally, our lawyer delivered the knockout punch. "We are countersuing for harassment, defamation, and fraud." Harold's face turned ghostly white. The courtroom fell silent. I could almost hear his world crumbling. This wasn't just about a restraining order anymore. It was about taking him down for good. And the best part? We were only just getting started. Harold thought he had everything under control. For years, he'd been manipulating Michael, setting boundaries, and forcing his way into decisions that weren't his to make. But this time, he had overreached. He believed that filing a lawsuit against us would intimidate us into backing down. He never realized we were no longer afraid. In the end, his own arrogance became his undoing. We knew his case was flimsy, but we prepared for battle regardless. By the next hearing, our lawyer had built a bulletproof countersuit. Harold had forged a power of attorney, scheduled fake medical appointments, tried to control our insurance, weaponized 911, and attempted to ruin Michael's career, all while accusing us of abuse, even though he was the one terrorizing us. The courtroom was packed. Harold had even brought an audience, his new wife, a few distant relatives, and even some old friends. He craved a spectacle, but he was about to become the center of attention. Harold's lawyer went first. He cleared his throat and launched into the most absurd speech I had ever heard. "Your Honor, my client is a devoted father who has been unfairly cut off from his son's life. He is a victim of emotional neglect and manipulation by his daughter-in-law." I couldn't help but laugh. The judge shot me a warning look, but I ignored it. Michael squeezed my hand, his calm exterior belying the tension he felt. This was his moment. When it was our turn, our lawyer didn't hold back. "Your Honor, my clients have been harassed, stalked, and manipulated by the plaintiff. I now present irrefutable evidence that this lawsuit is nothing more than a desperate attempt to maintain control." Then he dropped a stack of documents on the table, copies of the fake power of attorney, emails proving Harold had booked medical appointments under Michael's name, insurance records showing he had illegally changed Michael's emergency contacts, the 911 transcript from the fake domestic violence call, and the HR report showing he'd attempted to ruin Michael's career. Harold's lawyer paled as the judge silently flipped through the papers. Our lawyer continued, "I'd also like to call a witness." The doors opened, and in walked the last person Harold expected to see. His new wife stepped forward. Her face was tight, her hands clasped, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. The moment Harold saw her, he stiffened. Instead of sitting beside him, she sat next to us. The courtroom buzzed, and even I was taken aback. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. "I have something to say." Turning to the judge, she continued, "I can confirm that Harold forged the power of attorney." Harold's head whipped around. "What are you doing?" he hissed. She ignored him. "I saw him do it," she said, her eyes glassy. "He practiced Michael's signature. He told me it was the only way to ensure he maintained control because Michael wasn't capable of making his own medical decisions." Michael exhaled sharply. Harold's lawyer looked horrified, and the judge leaned forward. "Are you saying you were aware of fraudulent activity?" She swallowed before replying, "Yes." In that moment, Harold slammed his fist on the table. "You traitor," he shouted. The judge banged his gavel. "Control yourself, Mr. Patterson." The tension in the room was palpable. Harold turned to his wife, his face red with fury. "You knew this would happen if you crossed me," he spat. She flinched. Michael stood up and said firmly, "You've controlled people your entire life, Dad, but not anymore." For the first time, Harold looked genuinely frightened, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief as his world crumbled around him. In the end, the judge ruled in our favor. Harold's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning he couldn't file again. We won our countersuit for harassment and fraud. The forged power of attorney was officially documented as evidence of fraud, and Harold was hit with legal fees, a permanent restraining order, and potential criminal charges for forgery. But the worst punishment was that his entire family finally saw him for who he really was. His new wife filed for divorce within a month, his friends cut ties after learning the truth, and even Michael's distant relatives apologized to us for ever believing him. Harold lost everything, and for the first time in his life, he had no control over anything. A few months later, Michael and I sat on our porch, drinking coffee. He looked relieved, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. I reached for his hand. "You okay?" He nodded. "I am now." I squeezed his fingers. After everything we had been through, we finally had peace. Harold had spent his life bullying and manipulating people, but in the end, his own actions destroyed him. And the best part? We never had to stoop to his level, we just let him dig his own grave, and now we're finally free. After the trial, life began to settle into a quieter rhythm. Michael and I gradually rebuilt the parts of our lives that had been overshadowed by the conflict. The courtroom victory wasn't just a win in court, it was the turning point that helped us reclaim our sense of self. In the months that followed, Michael found the courage to explore new opportunities at work, free from the shadow of his past struggles. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping others who had been victims of similar manipulations. Together, we turned our pain into a purpose. We organized support groups and workshops, sharing our story to empower others to speak up and stand their ground. Meanwhile, Harold's world continued to crumble. The legal consequences he faced were just the beginning of a much harsher reality. Estranged from family and friends, he slowly realized that the power he once held through fear had vanished. His new wife, unable to forgive the betrayals, finalized their divorce, and even those who once stood by him began to distance themselves. In the end, his reputation was in ruins, and he was left to confront the emptiness of a life built on control and deceit. On a crisp autumn afternoon, as leaves fell and the air turned cooler, Michael and I sat together on the same porch where we had once found solace over coffee. We talked quietly about our future, about how our lives had changed for the better, and how we were now dedicated to helping others break free from the grip of manipulation. The sense of peace we had longed for was finally ours. We understood that healing is an ongoing journey. While the scars of the past might never completely disappear, we had learned to live with them, using our experience as a guide toward a brighter, more honest future. And so, with hope in our hearts and lessons learned, we embraced a new chapter, one defined by freedom, genuine connection, and the courage to stand up for what's right.